Singapore was fully committed to carry out our obligations under the HSRBA. But Malaysia felt that circumstances had changed, including due to COVID-19, and proposed several changes to the HSR project. Be clear about this, which is Singapore was not obligated to agree to any of such changes because we signed an agreement in 2016 already. But notwithstanding, we considered them in good faith. But we were unable to agree to one particularly significant change proposed by Malaysia. This involved the removal of the Assets Company, short form we call it Assets Co, which is the system supplier and network operator of the HSR service between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. Let me explain why. As the HSR is a cross-border service, it must be a single train system operating between Singapore and KL and Malaysia. Because neither country has the expertise and experience in operating the HSR, we agreed under the HSRBA to appoint a best-in-class industry player through an open and transparent international tender to assume the role of the Assets Co. So once appointed, the Assets Co would supply the train system, operate the network, ensure that appropriate priority is given to cross-border HSR service vis-a-vis Malaysia's domestic service, and Assets Co will be accountable to both countries, Singapore and Malaysia. To Singapore, Assets Co is the centerpiece of the HSR project. It is necessary to ensure that the interests of both countries are protected. This will minimize the possibility of future disagreements and disputes over the long duration of the project, lasting decades. Singapore therefore informed Malaysia that the removal of the Assets Co constituted a fundamental departure from the HSRBA and could not be accepted. Malaysia has since decided to allow the HSRBA to be terminated. In these circumstances, it has to compensate Singapore in accordance with the HSR agreements.
I note earlier in July 2018 that former Transport Minister Mr. Khaw Boon Wan said that the total cost incurred back then was exceeding 250 million, which is expected to exceed 300 million by the end of 2018. So in relation to the expenditure already incurred, if Minister can share the details for what's the difference and whether or not we will be able to recover the full amount of the expenditure, excluding land acquisition costs, as Minister has mentioned, and if so, when should we expect some form of conclusion on this?
Expenditure is roughly 270 million, less than what he has indicated earlier. Because when the project was suspended and we agreed to the suspension, we wound down the contracts and we maintained activity at a low level, which is why we did not incur as much as it was indicated earlier. And so now the expenditure is slightly over or around $270 million. Will we be able to claim the full amount? The amount to be compensated, as I mentioned, and the schedule for payment that's specified in the agreements. So there's a fixed amount specified in the agreements. Unfortunately, due to confidentiality obligations, I can't disclose the amount. Yeah, but we are starting the process of compensation.
First, is there any impact of the cancellation of HSR on the Johor Bahru Singapore Rapid Transit System, RTS? Second, what will be the impact of the HSR cancellation on the development of the Jurong Regional Centre?
The short answer to the first question is no. RTS is progressing well so far. The JB side have broken ground. On our side, we will break ground soon, and we hope the project and the service can commence in 2026 as scheduled. As for Jurong Regional Centre, let me assure the House that MND has started planning to transform Jurong as early as 2008. So the Jurong Lake District is part of a broader effort to develop urban centres outside of our CBD and our city centre. The plans for Jurong Lake District or JLD were therefore developed well before Malaysia proposed the current HSR project in 2012. It was only much later, in 2015, that we decided to locate the Singapore terminus of the HSR in Jurong. The termination of the HSR project, therefore, does not affect the overall impetus and vision for JLD, although some details may need to be adjusted along the way. When completed, this will be the largest commercial and regional centre outside of our city centre, bringing many jobs, business and recreation opportunities for Singaporeans and Singapore companies. The land parcels that the government has acquired are still needed to realise these plans.
What is the impact of the HSR's cancellation on the attractiveness of Singapore as the region's premier air hub and on the SIA group as a whole?
Throughout this whole discussion, the status of our aviation hub due to the HSR project has not been the key consideration. We knew that this Singapore-KL air corridor is the most busiest in the world. 46 flights a day. 1 year, almost 5 million passengers. The number that is almost equivalent to Singapore's residential population. But it is precisely because of this heavy air traffic between Singapore and KL that we believe that the HSR project was viable, mutually beneficial, and strategic for the long term. And so Singapore, we will always assess the cost-benefit of such major infrastructural projects from a national and long-term perspective, and not just from the perspective of one company or one industry.